Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Q&Play, my monthly Q&A series where I answer your questions in a rambly, unscripted format. First question comes from Oliver Stone. How did you get into D&D, and do you have any suggestions for new people on how to get into D&D? So the first part of that question I have actually answered before in my first Q&A. Essentially, I watched a show called Dice Camera Action that really got me into it, and I watched that after watching, I think, a D&D December video by Pro Jared, and then I got into the game from there, and Critical Role got me into DMing. That's how I got into D&D. And then any suggestions on new people for how to get into the game? Well, for starters, if you already have an interest in the game, then I recommend immediately trying to find a group. You can't play D&D unless you have a group of people to play with. So using LFG tools online, that is a very viable route, and for a lot of people that is the easiest route, finding randoms online. However, I do warn you that it can be a sort of gamble on what kind of group you're going to get, especially with random people. When you're playing with random people, there are benefits as opposed to playing with friends. When you're playing with random people, there's no preconceived relationships, so you don't have to worry about friendships getting in the way or DMs treating people unfairly because they know someone and they don't know another person. Right? So that's the benefit of playing with random people. However, you do need to roleplay among people you do not know, and when you're doing that, it can be really awkward and difficult. Depending on how quickly you can acclimate to a new group, I would use that to kind of gauge if you want to use LFG or not, whether or not you can work with a new group of people quickly. If you are used to working with LFG tools, if you use LFG tools to get a raid together for a video game, that is a step down from getting a group together for D&D, simply because with a D&D group, you stay with them longer. With a raid group, you play the game once and then you're done. At least that's my experience. However, they are similar. Like, when I get together for a raid, I'm very comfortable communicating with the other members of the team. Even though I am an introvert, in those kind of nerdy game situations, I'm very comfortable with leading a group and teaching people how to do a raid in Destiny or World of Warcraft. That means that naturally I can work with a group in Dungeons & Dragons, even if they are different. D&D, again, takes longer, much longer, maybe even years. Alright, if you're not interested or comfortable with that, there is obviously getting your friends together to play D&D, and that's what I did. My first D&D group was comprised of my friends. However, I do acknowledge that there are downsides to this. Number one, you need to gather people who want to play D&D. There's a difference between wanting to play D&D with your friends and wanting to hang out and, oh yeah, also playing D&D. Now, in this case, I'm talking about like a long-form campaign that the DM puts a lot of time and effort into. I'm not talking about a one-shot, beer and pretzels kind of event. That you can screw around and do whatever you want. I've done that a couple times with people outside of my main D&D group, and might do that with my main D&D group one day if I have enough time. However, when you're talking about a long-form campaign, it's really different from a typical activity I would do with a friend group. It's not like when I gather my friends and we happen to play Smash Bros. The reason we're gathered together is to hang out as friends, not to play Smash Bros. That just happens to be something that we do. But when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, the point of getting together is to play Dungeons & Dragons. If people aren't interested in the game and just interested in the friend group, the game is going to fail because you need people to be engaged. Dungeons & Dragons is not something you can do passively. An active campaign, or a more engaging campaign that the DM puts a lot of effort into and tries to create interesting storylines for, will instantly fall apart if people aren't engaged in actually playing the game. If you're serious about doing a long-term campaign and you want to have your friends there, make sure that they're friends who are interested in the game. I got 3 friends who were interested in Dungeons & Dragons, and then 2 more came along because they heard about the game. They wanted to join because they wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons, not just because they were my friends, and now we have a long-term group that's been playing going on now 3 years. Second question comes from Manuel Moya. I'm a player and want to get into DMing. Any tips, suggestions on where to start? Love your videos, keep it up. First off, thank you so much for watching. Second off, I will focus this around DMing because I kind of answered how to get a group together in the first question about getting into D&D in general, but in this question, let's focus it around DMing. If you've already been a player, that means you're familiar with the rules, and that's great. I was not an active DMD player when I started DMing. I had played, but not a lot. I was familiar with the rules, but I didn't really know them, and my main outlet for Dungeons & Dragons when I started DMing in that immediate time was just listening to Critical Role. Already, if you've played Dungeons & Dragons and you've been doing it actively, that means you're familiar with the rules and you're familiar with how a game should flow. That kind of experience gives you a bit of insight on how to DM. Now, of course, it doesn't mean you're 100% ready, and I don't think you're ever 100% ready. You need to jump in there and get your feet wet and run a game. I recommend, if you want DM for the first time, run a couple pre-made one-shots, run a module, something like that. I know a lot of people will push back on me saying that they've already got a campaign written, and that is awesome. However, your campaign will be so much better, your homebrew campaign will be so much better if you have some experience with module running or D&D running already in your belt. Because when you're running a module written by you and you have no book to back you up, there's no fallback when something goes wrong, like you don't know how to balance monsters, or your magical items are too powerful, stuff like that. I am not saying that you cannot run a homebrew game right out the gate. You can absolutely do that, and I probably am pissing off a lot of people who did do that on their first go around. However, if I was to give a recommendation for getting the best foot forward with DMing, I do think that at least for a little bit, you should run pre-written modules so that you can get your feet wet with running the actual game. Because writing stuff and running the game are really, really different things. There are plenty of videos that I've made and that other DMs have made about starting out with running the game and advice for new DMs. If you want to check those out, you can check out my Tabletop Tavern Tips videos. I have a couple good ones for you, and you can also check out videos from Matthew Mercer and Matthew Colville, Dale Kingsmill. They all make great videos on how to start out with DMing. Question from MediocreGlow: is there a way to make a Destiny RPG or a way to modify an existing RPG system to fit Destiny? I'm assuming this was asked because, number one, I'm a huge Destiny fan, number two, the Grimoire Anthology was visible on my bookshelf, which acts as great inspiration for lore in my universe. But anyway, point of this question is about Destiny RPG system, and yes, there is one that exists. It's called D in Destiny, and I did talk a little bit of crap in my last Q&Play about D in Destiny. I was involved in a horror story, but that is not the fault of D in Destiny. D in Destiny is an amazing hack of Dungeons & Dragons. It does a great job taking the mechanics of D&D and completely transforming them into pretty much a new game. It is a hack, so it is not compatible with D&D 5e stuff. It is a different game, essentially. It is similar in a lot of ways, in fact, almost identical in a lot of ways. It is a hack of D&D 5e, but if you take D&D 5e stuff and put it in D in Destiny, it will not work, and vice versa. So, is D in Destiny good? Yes, it absolutely is. It does a great job with everything. There's an extensive monster manual with tons of different creatures for you to fight, from the Fallen to the Hive to the Taken, etc. There is an amazing selection of weapons, subclasses. You can play as the Hive and the Fallen, which is really, really cool. Fallen Guardians is something that I've wanted since D1, and in D and Destiny it is possible because this is a game in our imagination and you can do whatever the hell you want. The game, to my knowledge, is not completely complete yet, but the original books are available on their website. I believe they're free, or at least last time I checked they were free, and I definitely recommend you give them a look if you want to play Destiny in an RPG system. Why aren't there more whip builds? Melee weapons with finesse and reach, meaning that rage, smite, sneak attack, battle maneuver, stunning strike, and hexblade shenanigans can all be used with this weapon. And before anyone says it's 1d4 damage, basically think about all the times you roll a minimum of 1 to 4 damage on a longsword. This is true, and I think that the reason there aren't a lot of whip builds is because, quite frankly, in traditional fantasy, not a lot of people use whips. A lot of the more obscure weapons in Dungeons & Dragons are just not chosen, and that's just how it ends up going with D&D. For a lot of people, when they think fantasy, they think longswords, bows, axes, hammers, etc. because of properties like Lord of the Rings, Elder Scrolls, Game of Thrones, etc. Properties where those weapons are really common. And when you think fantasy, you just don't think whip. And before anyone says Castlevania, yeah, I know, I love Castlevania too. It's one of my favorite franchises out there, but Castlevania is one franchise and it is not big enough to outrival the cultural impact of stuff like Lord of the Rings, where swords, axes, bows, etc. make up the weapons that the cast uses, and that's what people think of when they think fantasy. So yeah, I think that's a big reason why. And also, yeah, 1d4 damage just does not look good. When I talk to players about what they want, very few of them are going to say, I want to throw away the chance to roll an 8 on my damage. Very, very few. Final question comes from J. Macdonald. What is your favorite RPG system? I know it says RP system, but I'm assuming that's what he means. Yeah. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is what I play, it's what I have played, it's what I have time to play. I do not have time to get into all the other RPG systems, and the only other one I play is Call of Cthulhu, which I really, really enjoyed. I love Call of Cthulhu, I love the brooding, very Lovecraftian atmosphere of it. It's obviously Lovecraftian, I mean, look what the title is. But yeah, Call of Cthulhu is really, really great. I haven't had time to run a campaign for it, or learn how to run a campaign for it, or get into a campaign for it as a player, but the one game I did play online was really, really fun. The game master did a great job running it, and it had that horror aspect that I really, really love from Lovecraft's writing. However, I do have a love of D&D. I love the game, and yeah, that's what I play for the majority of my RPG time. And by majority, I literally mean like 95% of it. I play D&D 5th edition. No, I haven't played 3.5e, and I don't plan to anytime soon. I like D&D 5th edition, it's what I play right now, and well, like I said in a previous episode of this series, I don't like taking risks when it comes to my time. I will probably like 3.5, but right now I like 5e. It's what I play with my players, and that's probably what I'm going to stick to because that's what I have time to do. But maybe one day I'll change it up. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Q&Play and you want to let me know, then please do hit that like button. If you want to see more of my content, then please subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own thoughts, go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.